The airport was alive with the sound of rolling suitcases, soft announcements, and the murmur of hundreds of travelers preparing to board. It was a normal morning flight, and everything seemed calm. The bright lights reflected off polished floors, and people moved in a steady rhythm through the terminal. Among them was Officer Megan Hill, dressed in her navy blue uniform, holding the leash of her loyal canine partner Rex, a large German shepherd with alert brown eyes and a calm but powerful posture. The two had worked together for almost 3 years. Rex was trained to detect danger, sense unusual scents, and keep people safe. Most days were routine, checking luggage, walking the terminals, and making sure travelers could fly without worry. But that morning would become something no one could forget. As Megan and Rex passed through Gate 12, passengers lined up for Flight 279 to Washington. The boarding had just started. Families with children, business travelers holding laptops, and elderly couples with soft smiles were waiting patiently. The mood was peaceful. Megan stopped for a moment to let Rex sniff around the waiting area, a standard part of their security patrol. Usually Rex would check a few bags and move on quietly. But suddenly his body stiffened. His tail lowered, ears stood straight, and a low growl escaped his throat. Megan looked down immediately. She had seen that posture before. It wasn't just alertness. It was a warning. "Easy, boy," she whispered, tugging slightly on the leash. But Rex didn't calm down. His growl turned into a sharp bark that cut through the noise of the airport. People turned their heads, startled. Conversations stopped. Even the boarding agent paused mid-sentence. Megan felt her heart race. Rex only barked like that when something was seriously wrong. Rex's eyes were locked on one man in line, a tall passenger in a gray jacket, holding a large black backpack. The man flinched at the noise but didn't move away. He looked confused, even nervous. Megan felt torn. Her training told her to trust her dog completely, but sometimes false alarms happened. Still, something about Rex's intense focus made her uneasy. She radioed to the nearby checkpoint. "This is K903 at Gate 12. My partner's showing signs of alert." "Stand by," the other officer on duty responded. "Copy that, 03. What's the situation?" "Not sure yet," Megan replied, keeping her eyes on the man. Dogs fixated on one passenger. "Could be nothing, but he's not letting go." Rex barked again, louder this time. The man raised his hand slightly as if to say he didn't understand what was happening. "Is something wrong?" he asked nervously. Passengers behind him began to murmur. "What's going on? Why's the dog barking? Is there danger?" The peaceful boarding line turned uneasy. The flight attendant at the gate tried to calm people. But the tension was already spreading. Then, from across the terminal, a deep, steady voice called out, "Everything all right over there?" Megan turned. A tall man in a dark green jacket was walking toward her, his steps confident and sure. She recognized the patches on his sleeve Navy SEAL insignia. The man was Captain Aaron Blake, though at that moment she didn't know his name yet. He carried himself with calm authority. It's the kind that came from years of discipline and service. Rex stopped barking for a brief moment, watching the approaching captain, then turned back toward the passenger with a sharp short bar, as if to refocus attention where it belonged. "Sir, please stay back," Megan said firmly. "My partner's reacting to something. We're checking it out." Blake nodded, eyes narrowing. "He's not barking for no reason," he said. "You can tell by the stance. That dog's locked on target." Megan looked at him, surprised. "You've handled K9 South before?" "Many times," Blake replied calmly. "They don't make mistakes when they look like that." He stepped closer, his gaze fixed on the passenger. The man in the gray jacket looked uncomfortable now, shifting from foot to foot, glancing toward the gate as if he wanted to leave. "I swear I didn't do anything," the man said, voice trembling. "I'm just trying to get home." "I understand, sir," Megan replied, keeping her voice gentle but firm. "We just need to run a quick check." She radioed for another officer to assist. Rex started pacing, pulling slightly on his leash, his nose twitching. He moved closer to the man, sniffing the air around the backpack. Megan saw his fur rise slightly along the spine, classic sign of heightened alert. Something about that bag was setting him off. Passengers were now being directed away from the area. The gate staff stopped boarding temporarily, their eyes darting between Megan, the barking K9, and the man under suspicion. Blake crossed his arms, analyzing the scene. Years of field missions had taught him how to read danger, not through evidence, but through instinct. He noticed the man's trembling hands, a faint chemical smell in the air, barely noticeable, but sharp enough for someone trained to catch. "That bag," he said quietly. "It's not normal." Megan glanced at him. "You smell that too?" He nodded. "Yeah, that's why the dog's reacting. You can't ignore that." The man looked panicked now. "It's just tools and some stuff for work." He said quickly, "I'm an engineer. I work with demolitions and construction sites. It's nothing dangerous." "Let's verify that," Megan said, signaling another officer to approach. But before a backup could arrive, one of the boarding agents, anxious to avoid delay, called out, "Ma'am, can we continue boarding?" "We're already late for departure." Megan hesitated. Protocol said to pause operations during a possible security alert, but the officer at the next gate was signaling for confirmation. She didn't want to overreact in front of dozens of passengers if it was just a misunderstanding. Then Rex barked again, sharp, rapid, almost desperate. His paws pressed firmly to the floor, his gaze locked on that backpack like it was the only thing in the world that mattered. Captain Blake stepped forward, his tone firm and unwavering. "Stop the flight," he ordered, his voice carried across the terminal, freezing everyone in place. The boarding agent blinked, confused. "Sir, who are you to do it?" Blake said again, more forceful this time. "That's an order. Stop the flight. Now." Megan looked at him, realizing this wasn't just instinct speaking. It was the command voice of someone who had made life or death decisions before. She nodded to the agent. "Seal the gate doors. Flight 279 is on hold." The announcement went over the intercom, and passengers groaned in frustration. Some complained loudly, but the captain and the K9 team ignored them. The priority now was safety. Rex circled once, nose twitching near the man's bag. His barking softened to low whines. He was waiting, ready for direction. Megan could feel her heart pounding. This could turn out to be nothing. Or everything. Blake watched the man carefully. "You said you're an engineer, right? You handle demolition work?" The man nodded nervously. "Yes, sometimes. I've been near explosives, but never carried anything on me." Blake nodded slowly. "That's why your clothes smell like ammonium residue. You might not even realize it, but that's enough for a trained K9 to react. We'll have to confirm." Megan finally received confirmation through her radio. Airport police were en route. As they arrived, Rex sat down beside the bag, a final signal that his job was done for the moment. Megan knelt, patting his side softly. "Good work, boy." Passengers whispered among themselves, unsure what had just happened. Some thanked her quietly. Others stared in shock, realizing how a simple bark had stopped a plane from taking off. Captain Blake stood beside Megan, his arms folded. "You trusted your dog," he said quietly. "That's what kept everyone safe." Megan smiled faintly. "He trusted his nose. I just followed his lead." Blake looked down at Rex, who was now calm, tail resting on the floor, eyes still alert. "You've got a good partner there," he said. The airport slowly returned to motion as security teams began standard checks. But the air felt different, now charged with quiet respect for the bond between one woman and her dog. No one yet knew the full story of what they had prevented. But one thing was clear. If Rex hadn't barked, that flight might have taken off without anyone realizing what danger or misunderstanding was hidden in plain sight. And it had all started with one sound, a bark that refused to be ignored. The terminal had turned quiet after the flight was stopped. People who had been ready to board were now waiting in the seating area, whispering among themselves. Some looked annoyed, others looked nervous. But everyone's eyes kept drifting toward the spot near Gate 12, where the K9 team and Captain Aaron Blake stood. The tall man in the gray jacket, the one Rex had been barking at, sat down on a metal chair, holding his backpack close. His face showed both confusion and fear. He didn't seem dangerous, but the way Rex had reacted still echoed in everyone's mind. Megan stood beside her dog, trying to appear calm, even though her heart was still beating fast. She had seen strange things in her years of service, but rarely had she seen Rex so determined. Airport police officers arrived within minutes, moving with calm professionalism. Their presence reassured the passengers. One officer approached Megan and nodded. "We got the report." "You said your dog gave a full alert?" "Yes," she replied. "He wouldn't back off. He was locked on this passenger in his backpack. I think there's a chemical scent involved." Captain Blake stepped forward, his voice even and firm. "He's not wrong. I smelled something faint, too industrial, sharp. Probably residue from demolition materials." The lead officer turned toward the man in gray. "Sir, please remain calm. We're going to take a quick look inside your bag, all right?" The man nodded quickly. "I didn't do anything wrong. I'm just trying to get home." "We understand, sir," the officer said. "Please place the bag on the floor and step back." The man did as he was told, setting the backpack down carefully. Rex stayed close, muscles tense but controlled. His eyes never left the bag. The officers unzipped it slowly and began checking inside. Everyone held their breath, including the nearby flight attendants and gate workers. There were clothes, a toolkit, a pair of gloves, and a few small containers, nothing that looked harmful. But one of the officers used a handheld scanner on the bag and tools, and a small red light blinked on the screen. "Trace detection," he said quietly. "We've got residue of explosives compound. Probably industrial type." Megan's stomach tightened. The man's eyes widened in shock. "Wait. No, that's impossible. I don't have anything illegal." Blake raised a hand gently, signaling everyone to stay calm. "Let's take a breath," he said. "Sir, what kind of work do you do?" "I'm an engineer," the man said quickly. "I work with a construction company. We do demolitions sometimes. I must have picked something up from the site, maybe on my clothes or tools." The lead officer exchanged a look with Megan. That could explain it. These compounds cling to fabric and metal for days. Still, the rules were strict. Anyone carrying traces of explosive residue needed to be screened carefully. The officer called in the bomb unit, and the area around Gate 12 was temporarily closed off. Passengers were moved farther away, though no one protested now. The seriousness in everyone's eyes made it clear that this was no ordinary airport delay, while waiting for the bomb unit to arrive. Captain Blake stood beside Megan. "You handled that well," he said quietly. She nodded, still watching Rex, who had finally sat beside her leg, calm but alert. "I wasn't sure if I should call it earlier. Sometimes these dogs react to harmless things, perfume, cleaning agents, fertilizer." But he wouldn't stop. Blake smiled faintly. "You did the right thing. In my line of work, we learned that hesitation can cost lives. Better to act and find nothing than ignore a warning and regret it later." Megan glanced at him curiously. "You're military, right?" "Was," he said. "Navy SEAL. Retired 2 years ago. I was just flying home after a veterans event." He paused, then added, "Old habits don't fade easily. When I saw your canine reacting like that, I knew something was off." Megan nodded with quiet respect. "Rex has that same instinct. Sometimes I think he senses things before even I can see them." As they talked, the man in gray sat nearby, head in his hands. "I swear I didn't mean any harm," he muttered softly. "I was just trying to catch my flight." Blake walked over and crouched slightly so he could look the man in the eyes. "Nobody's accusing you of anything, sir," he said kindly. "But we have to take every sign seriously. You understand that, right?" The man nodded slowly. "Yes, I get it. I just wish this didn't happen. My family's waiting for me." "I'm sure they'll understand," Blake said, his voice gentle now. "This is about safety. You'll be on your way soon enough." Within minutes, the bomb squad arrived. They examined the man's belongings using specialized sensors and confirmed what Blake had guessed. The trace materials were from controlled demolition compounds, not anything dangerous by themselves. They were common in engineering work. Still, protocol demanded that everything be tested, and the passenger be screened again before being cleared. As the process continued, More airport staff gathered around, quietly discussing what had happened. Some passengers took videos from a distance, though security quickly asked them to stop. It wasn't a scene of panic, but one of deep respect. Everyone knew something serious had just been prevented or, at least, handled before it could grow into a larger problem. When the tests came back clean, the tension finally broke. The officer in charge turned to Megan and said, "You and your dog just saved this airport a lot of trouble. Even if it was only residue, we can't take chances like that." Megan exhaled slowly. "I'm just glad it turned out to be nothing dangerous." The officer nodded, then turned to the man. "Sir, you're cleared, but we'll need to log your information. You can take another flight later today." The man looked relieved, though his voice shook as he said, "Thank you for understanding." Rex wagged his tail slightly, sensing the change in atmosphere. Megan leaned down and scratched behind his ear. "Good boy," she whispered. "You did it again." Captain Blake smiled at the sight. "You know," he said softly, "I once worked with dogs like him overseas. They could smell danger before anyone else. Sometimes they were the reason entire teams came home alive." Megan looked up at him. "It must have been hard work." He nodded slowly. "It was. But it teaches you one thing. You trust your partner no matter what. Doesn't matter if that partner has 2 legs or 4. She smiled. Rex would agree with that. When the area reopened, the crowd applauded quietly as the story spread among travelers. Some people thanked Megan and Blake directly as they passed by, expressing gratitude that someone had taken the situation seriously. A little girl holding her father's hand even came up and said shyly, "Your dog's a hero." Megan knelt down, smiling warmly. "He's just doing his job, sweetheart." The girl giggled as Rex licked her fingers softly. "He's brave," she said, then ran back to her parents. Blake watched the moment with a faint smile. "You ever think about how many people go through life never noticing the ones who protect them? Dogs like him? People like you?" Megan looked at Rex, who now sat proudly beside her. "He doesn't care about attention," she said softly. "All he wants is to do his duty. That's enough for both of us." As the boarding gates reopened, a new sense of calm filled the air. Passengers were more patient, more aware. They had all seen how quickly a normal morning could turn serious and how one decision could make all the difference before he left. Captain Blake turned to Megan one last time. "If I hadn't walked by, I think you still would have done the same thing," he said. She smiled. "Maybe, but I'm glad you were there. You gave me the confidence to act faster." Blake chuckled softly. "Teamwork, then. Even if it was just for one morning." They shook hands, a silent respect passing between them. Then Blake walked toward his new flight gate, leaving Megan and Rex watching him go. Rex gave one soft bark, as if to say goodbye. The day slowly returned to normal. But the echoes of that bark stayed in everyone's minds. It was more than just a sound. It was a reminder that alertness, trust, and courage could change everything in a single moment. And somewhere deep down, Megan knew this wasn't just luck. It was fate that had brought a K9, his handler, and a retired SEAL together at the exact right time, in the exact right place. Sometimes destiny didn't arrive with noise and chaos, it came quietly. Disguised as an ordinary morning at the airport, interrupted only by the voice of a dog who refused to stay silent. The hours that followed felt longer than they really were. The airport buzzed with a strange energy, a mix of relief and curiosity. News of the barking K9 and the stopped flight had already begun spreading from one terminal to another. People whispered, pointed, and told the story in their own versions. But for those who had seen it happen for Megan, Rex, and Captain Aaron Blake, the feeling was more personal. It wasn't about gossip or attention. It was about the quiet understanding that something serious could have gone wrong if they hadn't trusted their instincts. The man in the gray jacket, who had been cleared of wrongdoing, sat quietly in the airport's private security office. His name was Daniel Cross, a demolition engineer from Texas. He looked exhausted, guilt and fear mixed on his face. Though he had done nothing wrong, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had almost caused a disaster by accident. Megan entered the office after giving Rex some water and rest. The German Shepherd lay beside her chair, eyes half closed but still alert. Daniel looked up as she walked in. "Officer Hill," he said softly. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cause all that trouble. I didn't know the chemicals from my work could still be on my clothes." Megan shook her head. "You don't need to apologize. You didn't do anything wrong. Rex was doing what he was trained to do, and honestly, you handled everything calmly." "That helped," he smiled weakly. "When that dog started barking at me, I thought my life was over. But now I understand why." Megan nodded gently. "Most people never see what goes on behind airport security. You just want your flight, your seat, and a safe trip. But there's a whole world of people and dogs like Rex who make sure it stays that way." Rex lifted his head slightly at the sound of his name, tail tapping against the floor once. Daniel chuckled softly. "He's incredible. I've seen dogs on job sites before, but nothing like him. The way he looked at me, it was like he was reading my soul." Megan laughed a little. "That's his gift. He can't speak, but he tells us everything through his body language. I just learned to listen." Outside, Captain Blake was standing by a large window, overlooking the runway. Planes were taking off again. The loud rumble of engines filled the air, but he seemed lost in thought. Something about this whole experience had stirred memories from his military days. Memories of danger, trust, and split-second decisions. When Megan stepped out of the security office, she noticed him there and walked over. "You okay?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "Yeah, just thinking how easily things can turn from normal to critical in seconds. You and your dog, you handled that better than some trained soldiers I've seen." "It's kind of you to say," she replied. "But it was you who made the call to stop the flight. Without that, the crew might have ignored me." Blake shook his head. "I only did what my gut told me." "You already had everything under control." For a moment, they both watched a plane lift into the cloudy sky, its wings slicing through the early afternoon light. It symbolized calm after the storm, the normal world continuing again. But deep inside, they both knew this story would stay with them. A few minutes later, the airport security chief approached. "Captain Blake, Officer Hill headquarters, wants to commend both of you for your quick action. And the dog, of course," he said with a smile. "You saved us from what could have been a full-blown emergency," Megan replied humbly. "We were just doing our job, sir." But the chief shook his head. "No, this was more than that. Stopping a flight is a big decision. If it turned out to be nothing, people might have blamed you. But you still acted. That's leadership." Blake gave a quiet nod. "Sometimes you have to take the heat to do what's right." The chief smiled. "Exactly. And now, everyone in this airport knows it." As the sun began to set outside the tall glass windows, the tension in the terminal eased completely. Passengers from the earlier flight were being rebooked, and the staff had started to relax again. Yet something had changed. The story of the barking canine and the SEAL who ordered to stop the flight was now traveling fast. News reporters were already calling the airport office for confirmation. But both Megan and Blake avoided the cameras. Neither wanted fame. They wanted peace. Later, Megan took Rex outside for a walk near the restricted runway area. The dog padded quietly beside her, ears twitching in the soft evening breeze. She knelt beside him, rubbing his neck. "You did good today," she whispered. "Really good. You probably saved hundreds of lives." Rex looked up at her, tongue lolling slightly, and pressed his head against her arm. It was his way of saying he understood. Blake walked out a few minutes later, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to her. "You looked like you needed this," he said. She accepted it gratefully. "You read my mind?" They stood there in silence for a moment, watching a cargo plane rise into the orange glow of the horizon. "I used to work with a dog named Sable," Blake said after a while. "He saved my life once. We were clearing a compound overseas. He stopped in front of a doorway, just froze. I thought he was being stubborn, but he wasn't. There was a tripwire across the entrance. If he hadn't stopped me..." He paused, eyes distant for a moment. "That's when I learned never to question a trained dog." Megan listened quietly. "So when you saw Rex barking today, you remembered that moment?" "Exactly," Blake said. I saw the same thing in his eyes that I once saw in Sable's, that mix of warning and loyalty. You can't explain it, but you know it's real. They stood there for a long moment, letting the wind carry the sounds of the airport around them. A few birds crossed the sky, gliding above the runway lights. The noise of jets faded in the distance. Finally, Blake smiled slightly. You know, most people think heroes wear medals or uniforms. But today, a hero wore a vest that said K9 Unit. Megan chuckled softly and drooled all over my shoes. Blake laughed. Even heroes have their quirks. Then a group of maintenance workers walked past. It's one of them calling out, "Hey, that's the dog from Gate 12. Good job, buddy." Rex wagged his tail, soaking in the praise like he knew exactly what it meant. Back inside the terminal, people were still talking about the event. Some passengers who had been delayed earlier were now more understanding. A woman in her 60s told the security desk, "That dog saved us, didn't he? You should give him a medal." Her husband nodded beside her, or at least a steak dinner. The story warmed Megan's heart. Not because of the attention, but because people finally understood what these dogs did every day, working quietly, unseen, until a single bark made all the difference. Before leaving the airport, Captain Blake stopped by the K9 office one last time. Megan was putting Rex's gear away. "I'm catching a later flight," he said. "Wanted to thank you before I go." "You don't have to thank me," she replied. "You helped us just as much," he smiled. "Still, I'm grateful. You reminded me what trust looks like again." Rex walked up to him and sat down, staring at the captain. Blake crouched, rubbed behind the dog's ears, and said softly, "You did good, soldier." The dog leaned into his touch, calm and proud. Megan watched the moment quietly. "He likes you," she said. "Good taste," Blake replied with a grin. When he finally walked away toward the departure gates, Megan felt a strange sense of connection linger in the air, a feeling that their paths had crossed for a reason. As night settled over the airport, Megan sat beside Rex in the patrol van, ready to head home. The lights of the runway sparkled through the windshield. She whispered, "Another day, another mission, huh?" Rex wagged his tail and answered. In that quiet moment, she realized something powerful. Sometimes real heroes don't fight battles in faraway lands or wear badges for glory. Sometimes they just stand in an airport, listen to a bark, trust their instincts, and change the course of 100 lives without even knowing. And that thought stayed with her long after. The engines roared and the planes disappeared into the night sky. The moment everything changed, because one dog refused to stay silent, and one man dared to say, "Stop the flight." The next morning came quietly, but for many at the airport, the memory of the previous day still lingered. The story of the barking K9 that stopped a flight had already spread beyond the terminal. Local news channels were talking about it, and by sunrise. Social media was full of posts praising the unknown officer, the retired SEAL, and the loyal dog named Rex. People called it the bark that saved the flight. Megan didn't expect all this attention. She had done what her training told her to do. For her, it was another duty completed, another moment of trust between handler and dog. But now, cameras and reporters wanted to meet the team who had stopped a possible tragedy before it began. When Megan arrived at work, her supervisor met her at the entrance with a smile. "You're famous now," he said jokingly. "Everyone wants to meet you and Rex. The chief's office called this morning. There's going to be a small ceremony later today." Megan blinked in surprise. "A ceremony? For what?" "We just followed procedure." Her supervisor shook his head. "Not everyone would have done what you did. You stood your ground, trusted your dog, and saved hundreds of people from a possible threat. That deserves recognition." Rex, walking beside her, wagged his tail like he understood. Megan laughed softly. "Looks like someone's going to enjoy the attention more than I will." Later that morning, she took Rex for a patrol through the terminal. People recognized them immediately. Some passengers stopped to take pictures, while others came up to say thank you. A little boy holding a toy airplane waved excitedly and said, "That's the hero dog." Megan smiled and let him pet Rex for a moment. The boy's eyes shone with excitement. He's the bravest dog ever. Megan knelt down and said gently, "He's brave because he listens and cares. That's what makes him special." The boy nodded seriously, then ran back to his parents, still grinning. It made Megan's heart warm to see how one act of trust could inspire so many. By noon, Captain Aaron Blake returned to the airport. He hadn't planned to, but the director of airport security had personally requested his presence. When he entered the terminal, several officers greeted him with respect. Though retired, he carried himself with the same quiet authority that marked him as a man who had seen and survived much more than most people ever would. He found Megan near the K-9 unit's office. "Looks like you're getting a medal," he said with a smile. "I'm still not sure I deserve it," she replied. "Rex did all the work. I just held the leash." Blake shook his head. "You made the call. The dog can sense danger, but it takes a human to believe in him. Most people would have ignored the barking or let the flight go on. You didn't." Megan looked at him thoughtfully. "You know, you didn't have to get involved either. You could have walked away, but you didn't." He smiled faintly. "Old habits die hard. When you see something off, you act. That's what we're trained for. Besides, I trust dogs more than most people." That made her laugh. "You sound just like me." By early afternoon, the ceremony was ready. It wasn't large or fancy, just a small gathering of airport staff, police officers, and a few reporters. A banner hung at the back of the room that read "In honor of duty and instinct." The airport's director stood at the podium, smiling at the small crowd. "Yesterday," he began, "a simple bark changed the course of a day and possibly saved lives. Officer Megan Hill and her canine partner Rex, along with retired Navy SEAL Captain Aaron Blake, acted with courage, quick judgment, and trust. Their teamwork prevented what could have become a very serious situation. Today, we honor that courage." Megan stood beside Rex, who sat obediently at her feet, wearing his black canine vest. Cameras flashed as the director placed a commendation pin on her uniform and handed her a certificate of appreciation. Rex received a new collar tag that read "Hero of Gate 12. The crowd clapped warmly, and even the reporters kept their tone respectful. When the director turned toward Captain Blake, he smiled. "And to Captain Aaron Blake, who showed that, even off-duty, a protector's instinct never fades. Thank you for standing with us." Blake accepted his commendation quietly, giving a polite nod. He wasn't one for attention. Still, Megan noticed the pride in his eyes, not for himself, but for the fact that something good had come out of trust and quick thinking. After the ceremony, the media tried to ask questions, but Megan kept her answers humble. "It was a team effort," she said simply. "Rex did what he's trained to do. I'm just proud to be his partner." When it was over, Blake and Megan walked out together, away from the noise of the cameras. They found a quiet spot near the observation deck overlooking the runways. Planes took off and landed below them, their lights blinking against the pale afternoon sky. "You handled that well," Blake said. "I hate being in front of cameras." "Me too," Megan admitted. "But maybe it's good for people to see what these dogs can do. They're more than just working animals. They're guardians." Blake nodded. "You're right. People see the uniforms, the leashes, but they don't see the bond behind it." There was a comfortable silence between them for a while, the kind that needed no words. Rex lay between them, his head resting on his paws, eyes half closed but still listening. The wind from the open deck brushed through Megan's hair. Blake broke the silence first. "You ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't stopped the flight?" She sighed. "I try not to. I just know it would have been a mistake I'd never forgive myself for. Even if it turned out to be nothing, I'd rather face questions than regret."
Oh.
"That's the mark of someone who belongs in uniform." Megan looked at him curiously. "And what about you? You ever miss the uniform?" He chuckled quietly. "Every day. But I've learned that service doesn't end when you hang up your badge or your rank. It just changes form." Yesterday reminded me of that. They both watched a large passenger jet lift off into the clouds. It rose steadily, strong and sure. Megan felt a sense of calm wash over her. "You know," she said quietly, "it's strange. One bark, one instinct, and everything could have been different." Blake nodded. That's how life works. Big changes often start from small moments. As the afternoon faded into evening, airport staff began leaving for the day. Megan stayed behind a little longer, sitting beside Rex and watching the sunset paint the sky in orange and gold. Passengers came and went, unaware of how close they had come to chaos just the day before. But she didn't need their thanks. The real reward was sitting beside her, tail thumping gently every time she looked his way. Before leaving, Blake stopped by once more. "I'm heading home now," he said. "Got a few more flights before I get there?" Megan smiled. "Take care, Captain," he grinned. "Just Aaron is fine, then take care, Aaron." He nodded, then reached down and gave Rex one last pat. "Keep her safe, buddy." Rex wagged his tail as if to promise he would. As Blake walked away toward his gate, Megan watched him disappear into the crowd. For a moment, she felt a quiet sense of gratitude. Fate had brought them together at exactly the right time. If either of them had ignored their instincts that day, the story could have ended very differently. That night, as Megan drove home, the city lights reflected in her car window. Rex rested quietly in the back seat, his head on his paws. The roads were calm, and the radio softly played a slow tune. Megan thought about everything that had happened, the barking, the panic, the captain's steady voice, and the relief that followed. She smiled faintly. "You did it, boy," she whispered. "You changed everything." Rex's tail brushed against the seat once, as if answering. The airport would move on, flights would come and go, and new faces would pass through its gates. But the echo of that day, the bark that stopped a flight, would live on in the memories of those who had seen it. Not as a tale of fear, but as one of trust, courage, and the silent partnership between a human and her dog. Reminded the world that real heroes don't always stand in the spotlight. Sometimes they stand quietly in the crowd, waiting, listening, ready to act when the world needs them most. A week had passed since the day the flight was stopped, yet people were still talking about it. The airport had returned to its usual routine, travelers rushing through the terminals, families hugging near arrival gates, and announcements echoing every few minutes. But for those who had been there that day, something had changed. They looked at the security officers, at the canine teams, with new respect. They had seen with their own eyes how a single bark could protect hundreds of lives. Officer Megan Hill arrived at work early that morning, coffee in hand, her uniform neatly pressed as always. Rex trotted beside her, his tail wagging, his eyes bright and alert. He loved coming to work. It wasn't a job to him. It was his purpose. As they walked through the terminal, several airport staff members smiled and waved. "Morning, heroes," one of the baggage handlers called out. Megan smiled back modestly. "We're just doing our job," she said. Rex barked once, like he disagreed, and the workers laughed. Later that day, Megan received a message from the airport director's office asking her to meet a group of visiting school children. They were touring the airport to learn about safety and aviation. When she arrived at the small conference area, she found a group of about 20 kids waiting, wide-eyed with excitement. Some of them were holding little notebooks, ready to write about what they saw. The teacher smiled warmly. "Kids, this is Officer Hill and her canine partner Rex. You might have seen them on the news. They're the reason a flight was stopped safely last week." The children gasped and started whispering. One little girl raised her hand. "Did your dog really save the plane?" she asked softly. Megan knelt down to be at their level. Rex barked because he smelled something that didn't belong near the flight, she explained kindly. "He couldn't tell us in words, but his bark told me something was wrong. So we listened to him and checked. It turned out safe, but it's because we trusted each other." Another boy raised his hand eagerly. "How do you train a dog to do that?" Megan smiled. "It takes time, patience, and a lot of trust. Dogs like Rex are very smart, but more than that, they're loyal. They don't think about rewards or fame. They just want to protect their people." Rex wagged his tail as the kids listened carefully. Megan let them pet him one by one, teaching them how to approach gently. Their laughter filled the room. For a moment, she forgot all about the stress and tension of that day. All she saw were bright faces and innocent curiosity. She realized that maybe the real reward for her work wasn't the medals or news stories, It was inspiring others to respect the quiet heroes who kept the world safe. Later, when the children had left, Megan went back to her patrol route. As she walked past Gate 12, she stopped for a moment. Everything looked normal again. The boarding lines were calm, the announcements routine. Yet, she could still remember that exact moment Trex's bark. The passengers turning, the tension that filled the air, and Captain Blake's voice cutting through it all, stopped the flight. That memory was forever carved in her mind. She placed a gentle hand on Rex's head. "You remember the spot, don't you?" she whispered. Rex sniffed the floor and wagged his tail as if saying, "Of course I do." Just then, her radio crackled. "Officer Hill, you have a visitor at the security desk," a voice said. She frowned slightly, surprised. "Copy that. On my way." When she arrived, she saw a familiar face waiting. Their captain, Aaron Blake. He wasn't in uniform, but his presence still carried that same strength and calmness. He smiled as she approached. "Thought I'd drop by before heading back to Virginia," he said. Megan smiled back. "It's good to see you again." "How's life treating you, Captain?" He chuckled softly. "Please, just Aaron, and life's quiet these days. But I figured I owed one last visit to say thank you and goodbye properly." She tilted her head. "Thank you? For what?" "You're the one who stopped the flight." He shook his head. "You did that?" "I just raised my voice. You and Rex were the real heroes." "I just followed your lead," Rex barked softly, as if agreeing with both of them. Blake knelt down to pet the dog, scratching behind his ears. "You still remember me, don't you, buddy?" he said with a grin. Rex leaned in and licked his hand once before sitting proudly. "I'll take that as a yes." Megan smiled at the sight. "He doesn't warm up to many people, but he never forgot you." "I guess he knows a friend when he sees one," Blake said. "I actually wanted to give him something." He reached into his bag and pulled out a small medallion on a leather strap. It was an old SEAL team coin, polished but worn from years of being carried. "This coin's been with me on every deployment," he explained. "I used to carry it for luck. I think he's earned it more than I ever did." Megan was touched. "Are you sure? That looks important." Blake nodded. "It is. But heroes deserve to carry what reminds them they're never alone." Megan carefully attached the coin to Rex's collar. It glinted under the airport lights. "You just made his day," she said warmly. Blake smiled. "Mine too." They stood there quietly for a moment, the busy airport moving around them like a river of sound and motion. But in that small space, there was peace. Two people and one loyal dog, connected by a moment of courage that had changed everything. "Are you heading back to duty?" Megan asked softly. "No," he said with a small laugh. "My days of running through danger are over. But I'm thinking about training young recruits now, teaching them about teamwork, discipline, and trust. Maybe even about how to read the instincts of a dog." "That sounds perfect for you," she said sincerely. "What about you?" he asked. "You ever think of doing something beyond airport duty?" She thought for a moment. "Maybe someday. But for now, this is where I belong. Every person who boards safely, every flight that takes off without worry, that's enough for me." Blake nodded approvingly. "That's the kind of purpose most people spend their whole lives looking for." Just then, an announcement came over the speakers. "Flight 279-2. Washington is now boarding at Gate 12, the same flight that had once been stopped." Megan and Blake turned their heads toward the gate. For a brief second, both stood in silence, remembering how different things had been that day. Now, the same flight was ready to take off against safe, calm, and ordinary. Megan smiled softly. "Looks like life moves on," Blake returned the smile. "It always does. But sometimes it moves on better because someone cared enough to stop and listen." He extended his hand. "It's been an honor working beside you, Officer Hill." She shook his hand firmly. "The honor's mine, Captain." He looked down at Rex one last time. "Take care of her partner." Rex barked once in response, loud and strong, earning a few smiles from nearby passengers. As Blake walked away toward his gate, Megan felt a mix of pride and sadness. Some people came into your life for just a moment, but they left behind a lesson that stayed forever. That day, she had learned the value of trust, not just between a handler and her dog, but between strangers who chose to act when it mattered most. That night, when her shift ended, Megan sat with Rex near the runway fence, watching planes disappear into the dark sky one by one. The wind was cool, carrying the faint scent of jet fuel and rain. She rested her hand gently on Rex's back. "You know, buddy," she said softly, "maybe we didn't just stop a flight. Maybe we reminded people that heroes can be anyone: a soldier, a handler, or even a barking dog." Rex turned his head slightly, his golden eyes reflecting the glow of the runway lights. Then he leaned closer to her side, quiet and content. The lights flickered across the distant sky as another plane took off, its engines roaring softly in the distance. Megan smiled, whispering, "Good night, hero." The dog sighed peacefully, closing his eyes as the world around them moved on. But inside that quiet moment, there was a story that would never fade, the story of a single bark, soldier's voice, and a partnership built on faith. A story that would forever remind everyone that sometimes a life can be saved not by strength or weapons, but by trust, courage, and the bond between one loyal dog and the human who chose to listen. And from that day on, every time Flight 279 took off from Gate 12, the staff would smile to each other and remember. They'd say softly, "That's the gate where the hero dog barked." It wasn't just a memory, it was a legend that lived quietly, reminding every traveler that safety often begins with a bark, a choice, and a heartbeat brave enough to act.